Hello. Voice. My voice actually might be a little bit wonky today because it's actually a little bit. I'm actually feeling slightly under the weather. I think I might have caught a touch of the illness that's been going around my store. But anyway, hello. My name is Oscar Fire, and today we are going to talk about the Wishsong of Shannara. I was actually thinking of doing a bit of a comedic bit to start this one out, but I decided, nah, I don't have the energy or the will to actually do that. But yeah, book. I finally finished reading it. Took me a little longer because I didn't quite because I didn't find it quite as enthralling as the Elfstones of Shannara, which is pretty much how I remember it going originally when I first read it. But yeah, so I'm gonna do a thing here. So for this video, I'm going to discuss the Wishsong of Shannara pretty much exclusively and try not to get into too many tangents or anything. And then I'm going to make another video where I discuss the original Shannara trilogy as a whole and also the character of Alanon, because I feel like there's a few things that are worth pointing out about that. So we're going to talk about the book. Good book. A really, really good book. Like I said, for me personally, not as enthralling as the Elfstones of Shannara. I find, as I was kind of hinting at when I reviewed Elfstones, I find the broader, like, darker tone of the book to be a little bit depressing. And that makes it harder for me to kind of, like, connect with it. Not that I don't like to consume, stories that have, like, dark themes and dark approaches and whatever. It's just that, generally speaking, I don't connect with it as easily. I think that's true for a lot of people. But that doesn't mean it's not a good book. I think that the way it's kind of framed is interesting to parallel quests as opposed to like a single quest with like some sort of side stories going on, because I mean that's what happened to Sword of Shannara. It's like basically there's the primary quest, and then it kind of branches off where the primary quest continues with Shay, but then there's the events with Minnie and Leah and Flick Onsford and Balinor and all that. Those are important plot points, but they're not a quest anymore. They are about the broader war. And then you have the Elfstones where you have the quest with Will and Amberil, but you have but you also have the defense of the Westland. So yeah, but yeah, overall though, I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to think. I'm not gonna lie, I actually don't have too many active thoughts about the book itself. A lot of the things I'm thinking of are really kind of like broader points that I would make about the trilogy and characters as a whole, rather than about the book specifically. But I kind of want to do something a little different for that, a little special for that, which is why I want to make it its own separate video. I will say, I do find it a little depressing that Terry Brooks decided to kill off almost the entirety of Jer's little adventuring company. The little group of six, the six companions, as he calls them several points, from Cullhaven, who... and four of the six die, and only Slanter, who was once the enemy, survives. I think it's a little poetically interesting. I like it. I like the idea there of having Slanter be the only one who survives the journey. But I think it's a little sad that the Elven Prince dies and that Elgthorker, the dwarf, dies. And I also like to point out, incidentally, that I have always said that Terry Brooks hates his dwarves, because anytime that dwarves are present in the main adventure, they die. I think only, if memory serves, first of all, dwarves only appear in like 2 more adventures after this, I think. And I think out of all of them, only one of them actually survives. And then after that, there's like no dwarves until the Fall of Shannara, where you have Battenheil and the other guy, can't remember his name because the Fall of Shannara is completely forgettable. But they're not part of the adventures, of course. They are part of the defense of the Federation. And they're kind of pressed into service in the first place. But it's just, I think it's funny to me because it's like, the dwarves always die. The dwarves never get to live. You know, what's his face from Hendel from the first book doesn't survive. The dwarves that appear in the second book actually survive, but again, they're like, you know, the two dwarves in the Fall of Shannara, where, you know, the main named dwarf, whose name I can't remember, he appears in this, but I can't remember his name, you know, survives the defense of Arborlon, but it's like, you know, again, it's not the same thing as the dwarves who go on the adventure surviving. But yeah, I think that overall, though, it's actually I think that overall it's very much I think it's just sad, and I wish that like at least one other had survived. I kind of know why he wrote it the way he did. I think he actually kind of backed himself into a corner where it's like Garrett Jax gets his ultimate battle against Jakira, again, you know, against the demon. But that wouldn't really have worked out if there were other people still around who weren't just going to pass by the Jakira, because it makes sense that Jer and Slanter would be the only ones to go to Heaven's Well. But it's just it would have been nice if someone else had survived besides them. You know, I don't know. It would have felt the ending ends up being very bittersweet because of it. Because even though the other four aren't very fleshed out, you know, Garrett Jax is kind of fleshed out. He's also very straightforward. But all the characters are very straightforward in the whole team. You know, they're very straightforward, but it's also enough to kind of care about them. You know, you care about Helt, and you care about Elb, or Forker rather, and you care about Edain. You worry about their futures. The only ones that are really fleshed out are Jer and Slanter, but that's because of the real focus there. But to just kind of like lose them like the way they did, it's a noble sacrifice, but it's just it's depressing. I must admit, as a power, the Wishsong is actually really interesting, I think. And the fact that it continues to appear throughout the rest of the Shannara series is not a bad thing, I would argue. I actually think it's a good element. You know, in the way that it manifests differently and is utilized differently throughout history. I think it's cool. It's cool. I like its introduction here though, with, you know, gentle Bryn and brash Jer, and how it also manifests differently between the two of them. How, for one, it doesn't affect reality at all, and for the other, it can literally do anything if she puts her mind to it. I don't want to go too deep into the Al-Anon thing, but I think that I like how the book addresses Al-Anon's relationship with the Umsfords, and how Bryn ends up feeling a bit of camaraderie for him, even though he's like being Al-Anon. He's being secretive. He's being very, very shifty as he usually is. I like how she still develops kind of like a gentle gentle bond with him, and doesn't just like kind of reject him outright or anything. That's not what I wanted to say there, really, realistically. You know, and she grows. You know, she misses him when he dies in his battle with his own Jakira. You know, I thought that was good. I thought that was good. I'll get into this more in the next video, but it was good. It was good, and I like it. And also, I like actually how the Mord Wraiths are kind of like background. The Mord Wraiths are a threat, but they're more threat because of the rumor of their existence more than because of anything they do directly. Of course, they summon the Kraken, and they summon the Jakiras, and, you know, the Mord Wraiths take over Paranor, and they have to fight them directly, and the Mord Wraiths, of course, attack them on the Croat, I think it's called, the staircase that leads to Heaven's Well. You know, I think that's all. I think that's all very. You know, I like that they're not like too present, because if they're too present and they have to be beaten all the time, then it leads to a point where kind of like what happens to the Borg in Star Trek, where because in Star Trek Voyager, the Voyager faces the Borg all the time. The Borg have to kind of be weakened so that a ship like Voyager can beat them. Well, in the same case, because Al-Anon dies, it has to be that the Mord Wraiths can't appear too frequently, but still have to be a threat. And I think Terry Brooks handles that extraordinarily well, and I really like it. And I guess I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The story, because I mean, the story is there's a lot. The story has a lot of journeying in it, and it's very much about the journey to the end than about the end itself. The end itself is very abrupt, and the coda is literally the most abrupt thing on the planet. It is over. The coda is over so quickly. It's almost kind of insane how quickly quickly the book finishes. But I like the journeying, and that reminds me. It's part of what I really liked about the early Shannara series, because the journey to the journey to the end is what a lot of what it's about. Seeing the Four Lands is what it's about, and it really kind of engages that part of my brain that kind of wishes I could travel more and see more of the world. I love that sort of thing. That's why I like the Lord of the Rings too. There's a lot of journeying in the Lord of the Rings as well. Oh crap, I forgot. There was something else I actually wanted to talk about. Oh yes. So at the end of the book, of course, Bryn gets tempted by the Ildatch and actually falls to it for a little bit. Falls to the temptation for a little bit, which I think is really cool. And I think it's cool because, of course, her Wishsong is incredibly powerful, and the temptation of power is there, and she succumbs to the temptation of power, especially without Al-Anon there to help guide her. And who knows, maybe Al-Anon himself might have fallen to the temptation of the Ildatch. You never know. But I think that's interesting because she talks, because Bryn doesn't talk about it, but Bryn considers it constantly. She considers constantly the temptation of the Wishsong to do harsh things to Wishsong, and the way Roan Leah becomes obsessed with the sword of Leah being an enchanted blade now. I think is really interesting. I also, by the way, I like to point out that the introduction of Kimber Bow, of course, being the progenitor of Walker Bow. I forgot that actually. I actually forgot that was a thing that existed. But I like that. I like the temptation of darkness. I'm actually gonna go off on a tangent here, just a short one. Because first of all, I think this is absent. I think this is absent in later Shannara books. The idea that not the idea that magic can be used for good or for evil, because of course it is, but the temptation of darkness is missing. The temptation of falling to darkness because of magic is missing. It's treated in a very straightforward thing, and magic almost becomes like a political MacGuffin in later books, especially the very last 2 or 3 series. Magic becomes more of a MacGuffin and a political tool, political manipulation and everything, rather than a power that is actually a legitimate concern and could lead to the downfall of good people. I think that Brooks forgets that, and it really weakens, future storytelling on his part, because he doesn't address it. An example I want to cite here is actually a fan fiction. So I watched a video reviewer called SF Debris. And many years ago, almost 20 years ago now, in fact, he wrote an epic crossover fan fiction called The Unity Saga, a crossover of Star Wars and Star Trek. And I'm banging my table again. I'm going to stop doing that. And he wrote it, and I'm going to try to avoid spoiling it all. But basically, one of the major characters of Star Wars in this crossover gets access to one of, I think I remember it's the Eclipse or the Sovereign. He gains access though to one of the Emperor in Legends continuity, gains access to one of the Emperor's super laser platforms. It's one of his super Star Destroyers that has it. And what ends up happening is that because the character in question gains access to this weapon, and starts using it. Starts using it to, you know, to crack planets and blow up worlds. Even though this character is inherently good, they end up falling to the dark side and start doing evil deeds because the temptation of power was too much. And that's present here. It's oh gosh, the reflection. That's present here in the Wishsong of Shannara. And I think that is an interesting dynamic. The idea that power corrupts, you know, an absolute power, which the Wishsong can corrupt absolutely. You know, I just thought that was a good example, because the idea of having a planet-destroying weapon is that's an extreme power. That's not just a power. That's an extreme power. And could it corrupt people? Absolutely. And I think that applies here. And I thought that it was interesting that it's addressed here, but it doesn't feel like it gets addressed enough in later iterations of Shannara. And yeah. So anyway, I managed to drag this video out a lot more than I thought I would. But hey, you know what? That last end discussion I think was the important part, but I'll you know, what have it. Anyway, so remember, there will be a second video. Don't know if I'll release it the same day this comes out or the next day. Depends on whether or not I get the recording and the editing done in good time. But yes, anyway, so thank you for watching. Yeah. I'll be back later, and I'll do a more dramatic outro then. So anyway, thank you for watching.